They thought firing me would be the end of the story. What they didn't know was that I had already written the final chapter months ago. My name is Gemma Lawson, and for 16 years I was the invisible architect behind Vanguard Solutions' most critical infrastructure. I built the digital backbone they all depended on, the silent engine that powered everything from client transactions to internal security protocols. But when the new CEO arrived, he decided I didn't fit his vision of a modern tech company. So on a Thursday morning in front of the entire leadership team he made his move. Thursday morning started like any other until it didn't. At 10:15 a.m., I stepped into the executive boardroom carrying my quarterly infrastructure report and a USB drive containing 6 months of security audits. The room smelled of expensive coffee and leather chairs. I wasn't expecting applause for my work, but I certainly wasn't expecting what came next. Zachary Holt, the newly appointed CEO, sat at the head of the mahogany table like a monarch surveying his kingdom. His suit was tailored to perfection, his expression carved from ice. The rest of the leadership team had already assembled. I recognized every face. Elena from operations, who I'd once helped recover from a catastrophic data breach. Trevor from finance, whose budget models relied entirely on systems I maintained. And there was Natalie, my former protégé, someone I had mentored through countless late nights when she couldn't tell a server log from a shopping list. "Gemma," Zachary said, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Let's make this efficient." I stopped mid-step, my report still clutched in one hand. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people waiting for a presentation, but the suffocating kind that precedes something terrible. He didn't wait for me to sit. "As of this moment, your position at Vanguard Solutions is being terminated. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. No one gasped. No one protested. Instead, faces turned downward. Pens froze mid-note. Coffee cups were raised to mouths that had nothing to say. I scanned the room, searching for one person with enough integrity to meet my eyes. Elena studied her laptop screen. Trevor adjusted his watch. Natalie stared at the table as if it held the secrets of the universe. Zachary slid a manila envelope across the polished surface toward me. The sound of paper on wood seemed impossibly loud. "You'll find your severance package outlined here. Human Resources will assist you with exit procedures within the hour." I didn't sit down. I didn't touch the envelope. My heart was beating steadily, rhythmically, almost too calmly. Because this exact moment, this precise scenario had been programmed into Archon's emergency protocols 4 months ago. When I first noticed the shifting currents in leadership, the whispered conversations behind closed doors, the way Zachary scrutinized my budget allocations with barely concealed contempt, I knew change was coming. So I prepared. If my access credentials were revoked under hostile circumstances, if my termination occurred without proper authorization through Archon's verification chain, the system would initiate a controlled lockdown sequence. Layer by layer, function by function, Vanguard's infrastructure would begin to freeze. They didn't know any of this. They thought they were eliminating a line item from their organizational chart. I stepped forward, placed my security badge on the center of the table, and looked Zachary directly in the eye. That smug little smile on his face didn't waver. "Understood," I said quietly. Then I turned, walked past Natalie's bowed head, past the people who once called me their technical lifeline, and exited the room without another word. Only when the heavy door clicked shut behind me did I allow myself the smallest smile. Not from joy but from certainty. The countdown had just begun and they had no idea what was coming. As I stepped into the elevator that Thursday morning, just minutes after my public dismissal, I didn't fall apart. I didn't rush to my car or call a lawyer in a panic. I simply pressed the button for the ground floor, held my breath for a count of 5 and exhaled slowly. This wasn't chaos. This was choreography. The elevator descent gave me time to think, though I didn't need much. The plan had activated the moment Zachary signed off on my termination. What no one in that building understood was that I wasn't just another employee with a job description and a desk. I was the foundation. Years ago, before Vanguard Solutions became a respected name in enterprise software, it was a struggling mid-tier company hemorrhaging money and clients. The infrastructure was a nightmare. Systems crashed weekly. Data was siloed and insecure. Vendors were abandoning ship. I was brought in as an emergency contractor to stabilize the bleeding. What I did was far more than that. I designed and implemented an internal relay system that could operate silently between every critical transaction. It validated data, secured transfers, monitored threats, and maintained operational continuity across every department without drawing attention to itself. I called it Archon. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with a marketing campaign or a product launch. It was just an intelligent, invisible layer that did what everyone else forgot to do. It held everything together. Over time, the company recovered. Contracts were renewed. New clients signed on. Investors returned. The infrastructure became rock solid. Everyone praised Vanguard's resilience. What no one realized was that Archon didn't live on Vanguard servers. When I built it, I saw too much internal instability. Leadership changed every 18 months. Budgets were slashed without warning. Political infighting determined promotions more than competence. So I didn't embed Archon directly into Vanguard's core system. Instead, I established a secure external server cluster registered under my own limited liability company, buried beneath layers of routine hosting metadata. Archon was deployed through that channel like a bypass cable only I knew existed. Legally, I retained ownership. Technically, I maintained full control. They used it every single day. They just never understood it was never theirs. After I was promoted to senior systems architect, I kept Archon out of official documentation. It became the invisible spine holding everything upright. Even Natalie, who shadowed me for 8 months straight, never asked about the automated alerts that only appeared on my terminal. And when Zachary Holt joined as CEO, I knew immediately what kind of leader he would be. I saw it in his language. Cost optimization. Operational redundancy. Workforce streamlining. He was a man who measured value in spreadsheets, not systems. That's when I coded in the contingency trigger. A silent command buried deep within Archon's logic. If my credentials were terminated without proper authorization through Archon's own verification protocols, the system would begin a gradual shutdown. Not an explosion. Not a catastrophic crash. Just a slow, methodical unraveling that would dismantle everything piece by piece. So no, I wasn't afraid when Zachary smiled at me across the conference table. He thought he was removing an outdated name from the payroll. He didn't know he was severing Vanguard from its central nervous system. As the elevator doors opened, I walked calmly through the lobby, past the receptionist who didn't bother looking up, and stepped outside into the cool autumn air. I pulled out my phone not to call anyone, just to check the Archon activity log. Status. Contingency trigger activated. Phase 1 initiated. It had begun. 3 days after my dismissal, I received a sanitized email from Human Resources. It didn't say I was fired. Not explicitly. Instead, it was wrapped in corporate euphemisms and passive voice. Your role has been restructured as part of organizational realignment. You are invited to transition into a temporary advisory capacity under the CTO's supervision. No office. No team. No direct reports. Just a shared workspace in a forgotten corner of the 4th floor with no nameplate and a Wi-Fi connection that barely functioned. My badge still worked, but only on select floors, and my email signature had been reduced to consultant, infrastructure, temporary. It was clear I wasn't being transitioned. I was being erased. Meanwhile, Zachary was busy rebranding Vanguard in his own image. He brought in a wave of new hires, all plucked from his previous company. They arrived with matching messenger bags, expensive sneakers, and vocabularies filled with phrases like synergistic workflows and disruptive innovation ecosystems. To the board, they looked dynamic and forward-thinking. To me, they looked like a disaster waiting to unfold. One of them, a guy named Nathan, couldn't have been older than 26. He had perfectly styled hair, a collection of enamel pins on his laptop bag, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything significant. On my 4th day back, I found him in the server room holding a tablet and frowning at a directory tree. "Hey, you're Gemma, right?" he asked. I nodded. Cool. Quick question. He turned the tablet toward me. "This directory cluster here? It's not labeled properly and hasn't been modified in over a year. Safe to archive, yeah." My stomach dropped. He was looking at Archon's decoy structure, an intentionally dormant layer I'd built to mislead anyone poking around too deeply. Deleting it wouldn't break the system outright, but it would trigger Archon's self-preservation protocols and accelerate the lockdown sequence. "You shouldn't touch that," I said carefully. It's connected to some legacy dependencies. Nathan smiled in that dismissive way only the young and overconfident know how to wear. No worries. Already queued it for deletion. Gotta clear out the dead weight, right? I didn't argue. I just walked away. What Nathan didn't know and what none of Zachary's shiny new team understood was that Archon had been trained for moments exactly like this. When it detected a deletion request without matching credentials or proper authorization, it automatically cloned the affected structure to a shadow drive, masked the original behind a decoy layer, and rewrote the access log to show action completed on Nathan's dashboard. His command succeeded. In reality, Archon had quietly saved the company from destroying its own operational backbone. And no one even noticed. Not Zachary. Not Nathan. Especially not Natalie. She had gone from mentee to middle manager in less than a year. Now she was overseeing strategic systems integration, whatever that meant. She no longer made eye contact with me in the hallways. When she did pass by, her smile was polite, rehearsed, empty. I had trained her. I had stayed up until 3 a.m. helping her debug her first live deployment. I had vouched for her when others doubted her capabilities. And now she stood shoulder to shoulder with the people replacing me as if I had never existed. They weren't just replacing talent. They were replacing history with aesthetics. They were swapping expertise for image. And they had no idea how fragile their new foundation really was. Still, I didn't protest. I didn't complain. Let them talk about digital transformation and user-centric paradigms. Let them gut the system from the outside in. Because for now, Archon still held the line. And I still held Archon. The illusion was theirs. But the architecture, that was still mine. That thought stayed with me as I walked into the presentation hall on Tuesday morning. The entire space had been transformed. Rows of folding chairs faced a massive projection screen. Branded slides rotated in a loop with phrases like, "Innovation Sprint," "Rebuilding the Backbone." I recognized some of that language. It had been lifted directly from one of my old infrastructure proposals. Except now it was being used to justify dismantling the very thing it once described. Zachary's team had invited everyone from engineering, operations, and even the marketing department. I hadn't been formally invited, but my calendar had received a blanket, all-staff welcome notification, and someone from HR mentioned something vague about technical presence for optics. I took a seat in the back row, far right corner. Quiet. Invisible. Natalie took the stage alongside Nathan. Both of them looked like they'd just stepped off a conference circuit. Natalie wore a tailored blazer and the kind of smile I used to believe was genuine. Nathan held a presentation remote in one hand and unearned confidence in the other. "Today we're going to show you where Vanguard Solutions is headed," Natalie began, her voice smooth and practiced. "A system that's faster, lighter, and built for the future. We're moving past outdated legacy frameworks and ushering in a new digital era." I watched silently as they walked through a user interface I recognized immediately. It was new paint on old walls. The routing logic underneath, still Archon. The security sequences, still Archon. They didn't even realize the data flowing through their polished demo was being validated and filtered by the very system they were pretending to replace. Then it happened. Nathan pulled up a configuration panel and misused a technical term. He called a subnet relay a dynamic token router, which made absolutely no sense. I couldn't help myself. I raised my hand slightly, not to embarrass him, not to cause a scene, just to clarify. Natalie saw me. She paused mid-sentence, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Gemma," she said into the microphone, her voice perfectly modulated for civility. "We appreciate you being here, but since you're no longer part of the active team, let's give the floor to the current architects." A few heads turned. Most didn't. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was hollow. Like a room full of people all pretending not to notice a quiet cruelty happening in real time. I nodded once. No anger. No comment. I stood up and walked to the back exit, letting the door close softly behind me as I stepped into the hallway. The corridor was quiet. The carpet muted my footsteps. I didn't look back. I made my way to the coffee station near the break room. The machine sputtered as it filled a paper cup. I sat on the worn vinyl bench nearby, holding the cup without drinking from it. That's when I noticed the intern. His name was Leo, one of the new administrative hires. He was standing near the hallway entrance, phone in hand, expression frozen in awkward realization. He had recorded the presentation on his phone as interns often do for notes. What he hadn't expected was to capture that moment. Me being dismissed. The room's non-reaction. We made eye contact. He flushed, lowered the phone quickly and walked away. By that afternoon, the video had circulated through a few internal messaging channels. I overheard it referenced near the elevators. "Did you see what happened to Gemma?" someone whispered. "They just shut her down in front of everyone." But no one said anything to me. No apology. No message. No quiet, "Are you okay?" Just corporate silence. Sterile, cold, impenetrable. I finished my coffee slowly, eyes on the floor. My badge still worked. My limited system access still allowed me to view Archon's monitoring logs. I pulled up the admin interface on my phone. 3 unauthorized protocol rename attempts. 5 failed credential pings. 2 auto-restore processes completed. Archon status, operational. I closed the tab and sat still for another moment, letting the humiliation settle. Not as defeat but as data. They had cut me out of the presentation, but they were still standing on the foundation I built. And they didn't even know it. No one looked me in the eye as I walked out of the building that evening. No one followed. That silence stayed with me as I drove home through rush-hour traffic, headlights reflecting off wet pavement. The office lights dimmed behind me, but the humiliation hadn't. When I entered my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights right away. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes and walked straight to my desk. The room was still except for the low hum of the air purifier in the corner. I opened my laptop, the familiar glow washing over my face. My fingers moved on instinct. New email. Subject: formal resignation. Effective immediately. I stared at the blank body of the message for a long time, then began typing. To whom it may concern, I am submitting my resignation from Vanguard Solutions, effective immediately. I am grateful for the opportunities provided and wish the current team continued success. It sounded sterile. Professional. Exactly what they expected. But halfway through the paragraph I stopped. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I reread every line. Then I hit backspace and deleted it all. I didn't know if I wanted to quit or if I just wanted the pain to stop. On impulse, I opened the Archon admin console. The terminal loaded slowly, the command bar blinking with quiet familiarity. I had built this console to be private, responsive, and irreversible. 1 line of code. That's all it would take to wipe Archon from their infrastructure completely. I could erase it. Every thread, every log entry, every silent process running beneath their glossy dashboards. No more safety net. No more invisible shield. But my hands refused to move. If I did it, people would suffer. Not just Zachary or Natalie, but clients, partners, the IT staff who relied on this infrastructure to do their jobs. People like I used to be. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling, and heard my mother's voice in my head. If they don't see you, make sure they feel you in the work. And yet I had to wonder. How long was I willing to be unseen? I returned to the terminal. My cursor blinked over the same half-typed command. I cleared the line, closed the window, and opened the activity logs instead. That's when I saw it. Alert. Unauthorized access attempt. 9:47 p.m. Origin. Unregistered device. Internal network. Vanguard HQ. I clicked into the detailed log. Someone had attempted a root-level restructure request on Archon's core framework. That wasn't routine maintenance. That was a power grab. Archon had blocked it immediately as programmed. But the request had been disguised behind a spoofed IP address. Sloppy, lazy, but ambitious. I traced the headers manually. It took less than 30 seconds. Archon always kept clean records no matter how hard someone tried to hide. The source. n.whitman@vanguardsoul.com. Natalie. My jaw clenched, but I didn't move. I didn't curse. I didn't even blink. Just stared at the name. She hadn't just stepped into my old role. She was trying to rewrite the system under her own name. 3 years ago, I had gone to bat for her after she accidentally corrupted a client database during a routine update. I took the blame. I fixed it. And now she was trying to take everything I'd built. Silently. Strategically. As if I had never existed. I didn't send the resignation. I didn't send a warning either. Instead, I opened a secondary terminal and typed in a new command. Activate watch mode. Trace unauthorized access. Log in shadow channel. Archon blinked back a single confirmation. Monitoring initiated. I closed my laptop. Let the silence return. This time it didn't feel empty. It felt loaded. The morning after I activated watch mode, an email from Human Resources landed in my inbox at 7:52 a.m. No greeting. No context. Just a cold directive. Please schedule a time this week to retrieve your personal belongings. A security escort will be provided as per off-boarding protocol. It hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because it was so impersonal. 16 years and I was reduced to a line in a corporate checklist. Still, I replied with a single sentence and chose the earliest available slot. I needed to close this chapter. Not for them. For me. When I arrived at Vanguard headquarters later that afternoon, the lobby felt colder than usual. The receptionist didn't even glance up. I gave my name. Moments later, a young man in a charcoal blazer approached. Ms. Lawson. I'm Carter from security. I'll escort you upstairs. We stepped into the elevator. Neither of us spoke. I could see his reflection in the polished steel wall. He looked uncomfortable, maybe even apologetic. I didn't break the silence. The fifth floor looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just stopped seeing it as home. Most of the workstations had been rearranged. A sleek digital display now hung where the project timeline whiteboard used to be. My old office had a different name on the door. The blinds were half drawn. My belongings had been packed into a medium-sized cardboard box and left on the corner desk like an afterthought. No one was waiting for me. No one said goodbye. I walked in slowly. Carter stayed at the door. Inside the box were the usual remnants. My ceramic mug with the mountain landscape print. A couple of notebooks. An old photo of my mother and me at my graduate ceremony. And a flash drive keychain I hadn't seen in years. I took my time checking drawers even though I knew they were supposed to be empty. The top ones held nothing but dust and a single paper clip. But the bottom drawer, slightly jammed, caught my attention. I tugged it open with both hands. Something had slid behind the drawer panel. A brown leather portfolio, warped at the edges, thick with papers. I pulled it out carefully. Inside were diagrams. My diagrams. The original Archon architecture, hand-sketched on engineering grid paper. Page after page of structure, node mapping, redundancy layers, encryption logic, access hierarchy. In the corner of the first page, faint but unmistakable, was my signature. G. Lawson, March 22, 2017, Boston, Massachusetts. I stared at it. A part of me wanted to laugh. They had tried to erase me from the company. Tried to replace me, overwrite me, forget the foundation I built. But here it was. The system they depended on, drawn in ink, born from my mind, signed and dated years before Zachary's new tech visionaries was even a phrase. This wasn't nostalgia. This was evidence. I tucked the portfolio carefully at the bottom of the box, beneath the mug and framed photo. Carter shifted at the door but said nothing. I nodded to him when I was ready. We walked back through the hall, past people who once called me their technical anchor and now couldn't make eye contact. I didn't blame them. This place had a way of encouraging silence. The elevator ride down was quiet. At the lobby, Carter finally spoke. Take care, Ms. Lawson. I nodded. You too. As I stepped outside, a gust of cool air met my face. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel numb. I felt aware. Aware of the weight in the box I carried and the power it represented. They thought they were escorting me out like forgotten furniture. But I walked away holding the one thing they could never recreate. And now I had proof. I didn't look back as the glass doors closed behind me. Vanguard Solutions was now just a shape in my rearview mirror. But I didn't need to turn around because what was coming was already in motion. As I walked across the parking lot, carrying the last remnants of 16 years in a cardboard box, my phone buzzed softly in my coat pocket. I paused beside my car, shielding the screen from the wind. Archon log notification. Status. Inactive admin protocol detected. Countdown initiated. 4 hours remaining. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just a quiet signal. I hadn't triggered it manually. I didn't have to. Archon was always watching and it knew the difference between an exit and an exile. By the time I got home, the sky was turning deep purple. My apartment was still. The air carried that late autumn crispness that made everything feel sharper. I placed the box on the dining table, slid my laptop out from my bag and powered it on. A familiar hum greeted me as I logged into my private Archon console. The version buried behind layers of encryption and accessible only through a device I had physically registered 6 years ago. No backdoors. No loopholes. Just one clean, secure connection. The dashboard appeared. Phase 1 scheduled. Access layer disruption. 3 hours, 12 minutes, 48 seconds remaining. Everything looked normal on the surface. System operations stable. No alerts. But the code was already unfurling in the background, invisible and inevitable. I leaned back in my chair, sipping lukewarm tea from the mug I'd brought home. The one with the Vanguard logo slightly chipped on the handle. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Archon wasn't built to crash the company. It was built to prove one thing. That they never controlled it. From the menu bar, I selected the hidden option labeled Override Protocols, and entered a multi-phase command. Initiate Layered Freeze Protocol. Confirm, yes. This wasn't a shutdown. It was a quiet suffocation. Archon would start by misaligning user permissions, just slightly enough that credentials wouldn't authenticate on the first attempt. Then it would stagger failures in back-end scheduling, pausing key processes for milliseconds longer than expected. Emails would queue but not deliver. Dashboards would load incomplete data. Financial tools would freeze at confirmation screens. All of it timed to hit in intervals across departments. Untraceable. Unconnected. Chaotic but not catastrophic. To the team inside Vanguard, it would feel like coincidence. Like the system was simply exhausted. I flipped over to the live monitoring feed. Already, Archon was recording minor disruptions. 11:34 p.m., payroll API delay. Retry queued. 11:51 p.m., login loop. Access timeout. Regional manager, West Coast. 12:02 a.m., financial record desync. Checksum mismatch. Nothing big. Nothing loud. And that was the point. I wasn't here to burn it all down. Not yet. I was here to make them uncomfortable in their own kingdom. Across the room, the box I had carried out of the office sat half open. The leather portfolio inside glowed under the lamplight. I didn't need to read it again. I had memorized every line of that Archon blueprint years ago. But its presence was grounding. They had walked me out like I was irrelevant. But I was still in the walls. Still in the wires. I typed one final command for the night. If admin reset requested, activate system decoy. If someone tried to fix it, Archon would show them a shadow version. A clean, harmless-looking replica that gave the illusion of stability. Meanwhile, the real system would continue freezing one invisible vein at a time. I shut the laptop gently and stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. The city was quiet. So was I. But tomorrow they would begin to feel what they could no longer see. And I would be watching every step. The first ripple hit just after 8:30 a.m. From my apartment window, I watched traffic crawl by like nothing was wrong. But inside Vanguard, the air would have already shifted. Not full-blown panic yet. Just the kind of irritated confusion that made people whisper harder, type faster, and refresh browsers more aggressively. It started with payroll. The HR team couldn't access the time tracking module. Logins were accepted, then redirected in loops. Submissions hung on frozen screens. Someone would have called IT. IT would have said, "Try again in 10 minutes." Then came the email delays. Internal message threads broke apart mid-chain. Replies vanished. Calendar invites showed as sent but never arrived. Some teams switched to text messages. Others began calling desk phones like it was 15 years ago. By 10 a.m. the CRM platform refused to sync. Real-time updates for sales projections failed to upload. Client orders showed as pending when they had already shipped. A director in the Seattle office threatened to call clients manually, only to discover the contact database wouldn't load. And through it all I watched. Calm, quiet, focused. Archon was doing exactly what I had taught it to do. Not crash the company. Just bend it layer by layer until it creaked loud enough for everyone to hear. By midday someone had escalated. A company-wide meeting was called. I couldn't see it of course, but I could imagine the room. Zachary at the front, sleeves rolled, looking performative and annoyed. Natalie standing beside him, jaw tight, flipping through half-formed explanations about system transition roadmaps. It must have been brutal because by 1:42 p.m., Natalie's username showed up in multiple log entries. She was trying to ping legacy environments, running diagnostics with incomplete admin keys, even requesting access to directories that had been dormant for years. Meanwhile, Archon's freeze protocol was still only in phase 2. Just enough to confuse them. Not enough to connect the dots. But then came the twist I didn't expect. At 3:37 p.m., a junior systems engineer named Felix Tran logged into a diagnostic shell and triggered something most wouldn't even notice. He had run a deep trace scan on the CRM pipeline and found a non-indexed relay command buried inside the transaction buffer. That command had a name. archon_proxy.root.log. It wasn't supposed to show up. But he had been thorough. He tried to open the log. Archon rejected the attempt. He ran it again, this time using a limited access override. Archon didn't block him outright. It offered a message. Secure biometric credential required. Voice signature mismatch. Felix, probably thinking it was a leftover test module, tried checking who created the original signature. And there was. Credential owner, G. Lawson, archived. I paused when I saw the log alert appear on my own dashboard. My hands were steady, but I didn't move them. Just stared at the screen as the terminal blinked, waiting for input. They had finally tripped over the bones of the system they never understood. Felix didn't have the clearance to go further. The system kicked him out, flagged the attempt, and returned him to the main console with no further access. I imagined him frowning at his screen, unsure if he had just made a breakthrough or touched something forbidden. I imagined him glancing toward Natalie, debating whether to mention the name he saw. And then I imagined Natalie hearing that name. And feeling her throat tighten. From my living room, I watched Archon restabilize itself, automatically scrubbing the access path Felix had uncovered. The log remained intact but now nested deeper. One layer further from anyone curious enough to try again. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I felt something bloom in my chest. Not revenge. Not pride. Something quieter. Something earned. They were beginning to feel it. The slowness. The cracks. The gaps in their control. And no matter how many firewalls they threw at it, they would never reach the core. Because the core was me. And I never gave them the keys. I closed the laptop gently as the clock struck 4. Outside, the wind picked up. Another domino had fallen. And the table was starting to shake. By the next morning, the cracks had become undeniable. Vanguard's systems weren't just sluggish anymore. They were failing. The facade of control Zachary had tried to maintain was unraveling. Even from miles away, I could feel the panic ripple through the building like static electricity. They had spent the entire previous day chasing ghosts. Restarting workstations. Calling vendors. Blaming outdated hardware. But today they realized it wasn't going away. I knew Zachary well enough to predict his next move. At 7:58 a.m., I received confirmation through Archon's observer logs. A new set of encrypted IPs had been granted temporary access. He had called in outside help. Cybersecurity contractors from a firm in Washington, according to metadata embedded in their device IDs. The goal was clear. Wipe everything. Factory reset the infrastructure. Remove the chaos and start fresh. But Archon wasn't built to be rebooted like a broken laptop. It had safeguards. And more importantly, it had me. I watched from my console as the external team began their probe. They started with surface-level scans, checking for malware, mapping traffic bottlenecks. Then they moved deeper, running diagnostics that brushed up against Archon's outer threads. It took them only 17 minutes to realize something didn't add up. By 8:42 a.m., one of the lead engineers, Jared Knox, judging by his login ID, identified a hidden thread buried beneath Vanguard's real-time analytics engine. He flagged it for escalation. I could almost picture the room. People huddled around one monitor, eyes narrowing. Then came the bypass attempt. Jared wrote a custom script designed to penetrate nested virtual partitions. On his third try, he triggered Archon's containment response. Not the full lockout. Just a soft firewall redirect. A warning. The kind that says you're getting too close. But he didn't stop. On attempt 4, his script ran a brute force simulation, hammering through false paths until it nearly found Archon's access seed. A digital fingerprint that led directly to core logic. For a moment I felt a sharp, unexpected pinch of anxiety in my chest. He was clever. Too clever. I held my breath as the script compiled. Then Archon moved. Access anomaly detected. Unrecognized admin authority. Revoking permissions. In less than 1 second, Jared's entire credentials were deleted from Vanguard's internal system tree. Every clearance. Every alias. Every access path. Gone. To Vanguard's network, it was as if he had never touched the building. The screen went black. Then rebooted. Without him. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't joy I felt. It was disappointment. Because for a split second I had hoped someone might be able to see it. To understand what I had built. Not to steal it but to grasp its depth. But Jared, like the others, had come to dismantle, not to learn. Still, there was something oddly comforting about how Archon responded. Clean. Immediate. Proactive. It remembered its purpose even when everyone else forgot who gave it one. Back inside Vanguard, the log showed rising tension. A new alert chain began pinging across systems. Team leaders questioning why their emergency consultant had suddenly lost access mid-investigation. Zachary issued a temporary lockdown of all admin terminals. Natalie attempted to reassign the probe to internal staff, but it was too late. The story was shifting. What had started as a system hiccup was now becoming something bigger. Something deliberate. Something dangerous. I stood up from my chair, stepped to the window and let the morning sun hit my face. It had rained overnight and the pavement shimmered with traces of gold. For the first time in weeks I let myself feel it. Hope. Not because they were failing but because the truth was starting to rise. No more hiding. No more pretending. I hadn't wanted to hurt Vanguard. I had only ever wanted to be seen. And now, one failed reset attempt at a time, they were finally beginning to look. I knew it was only a matter of time before Zachary stopped chasing phantoms and started pointing fingers. What I didn't expect was how quickly he would turn to blame and how brazenly. It started with a letter. Late Friday afternoon my personal email pinged. The subject line was clinical. Notice of legal inquiry, Vanguard Solutions. For a brief moment I thought it might be a mistake. Then I opened the PDF. Inside was a formal accusation drafted by Vanguard's legal team and copied to an outside law firm. In it, they alleged I had intentionally compromised the company's infrastructure, introduced malicious code, and violated my confidentiality agreement post-termination. There were paragraphs of legalese dressed in vague claims. Unusual system behaviors traced to legacy-level processes maintained by a former employee. Potential acts of sabotage carried out via unauthorized remote access. Unauthorized retention of proprietary frameworks. They never used my name outright, but I wasn't naive. It was about me. My hands went cold as I scrolled through the pages. There were veiled threats about litigation. Demands for a written response. A request to cease any and all contact with Vanguard systems. I sat still, letting the anger rise. Not hot and explosive but slow and pressurized. They had fired me in front of a room full of people. Tried to erase me. And now they were trying to destroy me. And yet, underneath the fury there was a calm awareness. Because I had something they didn't. I stood, walked to the shelf beside my desk and pulled out the cardboard box I had brought home from the office a week earlier. Beneath my coffee mug and framed photo was the leather portfolio. I opened it carefully. There was the original Archon blueprint, drawn in ink, annotated in pencil. My signature at the bottom corner. G. Lawson, March 22, 2017, Boston, Massachusetts. It wasn't just a design sketch. It was a time-stamped artifact. A record of authorship. The language, the structure, the conceptual layering. All of it predated Vanguard's involvement. I hadn't built Archon for them. I had brought it with me, enhanced it under my own protocols, and deployed it to their systems through architectural integration that never touched company-owned servers. I even had the original file metadata backed up, along with hosting invoices, registration details for the private relay server, and a licensing agreement I had quietly drafted but never executed. It was all sitting in my encrypted drive, waiting. For 7 years. I had been the system's architect, operator, and silent guardian. And now, for the first time, I was about to become its defender. I called my attorney. She had helped me with minor intellectual property protections years ago, but she knew my work well enough to understand the gravity of this moment. After I forwarded her the email and the documentation, she called back almost immediately. "Zachary doesn't know what he just walked into," she said flatly. "They've made a serious mistake. This isn't just a bad faith accusation. It's borderline defamation. And you have airtight proof." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The pressure in my chest loosened. Not because the fight was over, but because I now had the leverage to finish it. The next morning, my attorney submitted a response to Vanguard's legal team. It was short, professional, and laced with a calm they wouldn't see coming. Attached to it was the scanned blueprint. Dated, signed, irrefutable, along with server registration documents, hosting agreements, metadata logs, and a preliminary cease and desist regarding their unauthorized use of my proprietary system. And just like that, the silence on their end became louder than anything they had ever said to me. They had tried to turn me into the villain. But they forgot one thing. You don't accuse the architect of burning down the building when she's the one who laid every single brick. The cracks had reached the top floor. After a week of operational chaos, disrupted payroll, corrupted client data, failed platform recovery attempts, and a legal threat that backfired spectacularly, Vanguard's board had no choice. A private high-level investor meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. It was supposed to be a formality, a show of control. Instead, it became an unraveling. At 9 a.m., the conference room lights dimmed and a dozen faces flickered onto the screen. Some from New York. Others from London. One from Singapore, bleary-eyed despite the late hour. Most were shareholders who never paid attention to system architecture. They cared about deliverables, quarterly gains, and market confidence. But that morning, all they cared about was one word. I wasn't there. Not in person. But I didn't need to be. Archon's monitoring interface was open in my apartment, quietly recording every login, every click, every document shared. The system had been silently invited into the meeting via a shared audit file Natalie had uploaded for transparency. She didn't realize Archon could see everything inside it. Zachary stood at the head of the boardroom table, visibly tense. His tone was controlled, his language rehearsed. He blamed the recent outages on a residual infrastructure flaw inherited from a previous operational era. A few heads nodded. One woman jotted something down. Then came the question that shattered the script. A voice from the upper left corner of the screen. Come. Unmistakably British. Cut in. Who owns Archon? Zachary blinked. Pardon? The system. Is it proprietary to Vanguard or subcontracted? Because its footprint doesn't match the infrastructure outlined in our last technology brief. Zachary shifted. It was built internally years ago. Legacy architecture maintained under our systems division. A beat of silence followed. Then the voice returned. That's not what I was told. Everyone turned their heads. The speaker's name appeared in bold text beneath his video frame. Elliot Grange, Senior Equity Partner, Harwick Capital. He wasn't just an investor. He was the investor. The man whose early funding had kept Vanguard afloat during its first scaling crisis. His words carried weight. And his face, though calm, was unreadable. I met with Gemma Lawson 4 years ago, Elliot continued. At the Q2 Partner Summit in Chicago. We sat across from each other at dinner. She walked me through a schematic she had sketched on a napkin. The same logic structure this Archon system appears to follow. He leaned forward slightly. I remember because I kept that napkin, she said, and I quote, "It's the circulatory system behind the infrastructure. No one sees it, but it keeps everything alive." He glanced off screen, then added, "And I still have that napkin. With her signature." Zachary's face lost its color. Natalie went still, hands frozen above the keyboard. A few investors exchanged glances. The room on screen seemed to exhale, then hold its breath. Someone finally asked, "So the system isn't ours?" Elliot nodded slightly. "I'm beginning to wonder if it ever was." I watched from my apartment as Archon captured every second. I didn't smile. Not fully. But my jaw relaxed. My hands unclenched. It was the first time someone in power had said my name and attached it to what I built. Not what they tried to erase. Zachary fumbled for a response. Mumbled something about incomplete documentation and pending clarifications. But the damage was done. You can't lie to the man holding the checkbook. The meeting ended 18 minutes early. No decisions made. No reassurances offered. Just questions. Big, expensive questions. As the video feed shut down, I sat in the quiet stillness of my living room, sunlight pouring through the blinds. This time the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like gravity shifting back into balance. They had tried to bury me, but their foundation had been built on what I wrote. On my logic. My code. My vision. And now, finally, someone had turned the spotlight in the right direction. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was recognition. And it was long overdue. The offer came in just 3 days after the investor meeting. It wasn't from a giant firm. No billion-dollar unicorn. No flashy name. Just a quiet, steadily growing startup in Portland. One I had helped advise years ago when they were still working out of a shared co-working space with folding tables and second-hand monitors. The founder, Ava Lindstrom, had been a junior systems engineer back then. Barely 30. But sharper than most VPs I had met at Vanguard. Now she was CEO. And she wanted me to join as her chief technology officer. No politics. No games. Just a simple email. We're building something that actually deserves to scale. We want you to build its brain. Are you in? I didn't hesitate. The new company didn't have Vanguard's resources. But it had something better. Integrity. Curiosity. And the humility to know what it didn't know. It was exactly the kind of place where Archon had always belonged. So I took the offer. Quietly. No announcement. No fanfare. And then I renamed it. Archon 2.0, built on trust. Reborn in clarity. This time the system wouldn't live in the shadows. It would anchor everything by design, not by accident. We rebuilt its core, integrating the strongest parts of the original engine while removing the legacy constraints that once tied it to Vanguard's framework. My new team didn't ask, how do we market this? They asked, how do we protect people with it? And for the first time in a long time I felt like I wasn't guarding something alone. Meanwhile, Vanguard spiraled. The investor board began freezing budget approvals. Client trust plummeted. Articles surfaced quietly in niche tech journals. Phrases like critical architecture mismanagement and loss of internal system ownership crept into headlines. Their stock dipped. Then dipped again. Natalie was quietly removed from all public-facing roles. Zachary stopped appearing on internal communications. A new interim CTO was named. Someone from finance. It was only a matter of time. I didn't gloat. I didn't retaliate. But I didn't turn away either. 1 week after the system relaunch, I visited a rooftop cafe downtown. Archon 2.0 had just onboarded its 7th beta client. I stepped onto the outdoor terrace to take a call. And when it ended, I stayed there for a while, staring across the skyline. From that height, I could see Vanguard's headquarters. Glass. Chrome. Pristine. But I also saw the cracks. The flickering lights on the 9th floor. The half-empty parking lot at mid-morning. The empire I helped build, now slipping through the cracks of its own arrogance. And I smiled. Not wide. Not wicked. Just enough. Because I knew something they never learned. You can fire a title. But you can't erase the mind that built the foundation. Sometimes power doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to outlast the noise. 6 months later, I stood in front of a room full of engineers at a regional technology summit in Denver. The invitation had come from the organizing committee. They wanted someone to speak about infrastructure resilience and ethical system design. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my strength. But Ava convinced me. People need to hear your story, she had said. Not the revenge part. The part about building something that matters. So I accepted. The room was packed. Over 200 faces, some young and eager, others seasoned and skeptical. I recognized a few names from industry circles. But most were strangers. I began with a simple question. How many of you have built something important that no one ever saw? Nearly every hand went up. I nodded. Then you understand what it's like to be invisible. To hold the weight of an entire system while someone else takes the credit. To watch people who don't understand your work make decisions that could destroy it. The room was silent. I spent 16 years building the backbone of a company that forgot I existed. When they fired me, they thought they were removing a name from a payroll spreadsheet. What they didn't realize was that they were severing themselves from the foundation they stood on. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. I didn't crash their system out of revenge. I built safeguards into it because I knew one day someone would try to take it from me. And when they did, the system remembered who created it. Not because I programmed it to be vindictive, but because I programmed it to be honest. A few people nodded. Someone in the back row was taking notes. Here's what I learned. Your work has value whether or not someone acknowledges it. And if you build something truly foundational, it will defend itself when the time comes. Not with violence. Not with destruction. But with truth. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the original Archon blueprint. Hand-drawn. Signed. Dated. This is the napkin sketch that saved my career. Not because it was brilliant but because it was mine. I had proof. I had documentation. I had ownership. And when they tried to erase me, I had evidence that I was never theirs to erase. The room erupted in applause. Not polite conference clapping but real, sustained recognition. After the session, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. Ms. Lawson, I just wanted to say, thank you. I've been the only woman on my team for 3 years. They keep taking credit for my work. I didn't know how to fight back without seeming difficult. I looked her in the eye. Document everything. Sign your work. Keep records. And never, ever give away ownership of what you build. Not out of paranoia but out of respect for yourself. She nodded, eyes glistening. As I walked out of the conference center that afternoon, the sun was setting over the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of amber and violet. My phone buzzed. A message from Ava. Archon 2.0 just signed its 15th client. We're officially scaling. You did it, Gemma. I smiled. Not because I had won some corporate battle, but because I had built something that mattered. Something that would outlast the egos and politics and quarterly earnings reports. I had built something true. And in the end, that was the only empire worth having.